There is a book in the Bible that does something no other book quite dares to do with the same unflinching directness. It walks straight into the middle of human experience, not the sanitized Sunday morning version of human experience, but the raw, unedited, honestly exhausted version, and it tells the truth about what it finds there. It does not rush toward comfort. It does not paper over the cracks with easy reassurance. It does not pretend that the questions are simpler than they are, or that the answers arrive more quickly than they do. Instead, it sits in the difficulty. It stays in the tension. It asks the hardest questions that the human mind can form and refuses to let go of them until genuine wisdom has been wrung from their depths. That book is Ecclesiastes, and if you have never read it slowly, never given it room to breathe in your life, never allowed its paradoxes and provocations to do their full work in your soul, then you are holding a treasure whose value you have not yet begun to measure. We live in a world defined by noise. Not just the auditory kind, though there is certainly enough of that, but the noise of competing demands, of relentless information, of voices from every direction telling you what to want and who to be and how to measure the worth of your days. The noise of comparison, which the internet has industrialized and delivered directly into your pocket. The noise of anxiety, which rises in the quiet moments you try to steal for rest, filling the spaces where peace might have grown with questions about the future, the finances, the children, the health, the direction of the world, the state of your heart. The noise of busyness, which we have collectively elevated into a virtue so thoroughly that we now feel guilty for the moments when we are not productive, not achieving, not moving towards some goal or another at speed. Into all of that noise, Ecclesiastes speaks with a voice that is utterly different from every other voice competing for your attention. It is ancient and calm and completely unimpressed by urgency. It is the voice of a man who had more wealth, more wisdom, more pleasure, more power, more achievement than virtually any other human being in recorded history, and who sat with all of it in his hands and examined it with the honest, penetrating gaze of a man determined to understand what life actually means rather than what we hope it means. That man was Solomon, king of Israel, son of David, and the author whose reflections form the book we are about to spend serious, careful, transformative time inside. Solomon's credentials for writing this book are, in a peculiar way, the opposite of what you might expect. We tend to think that wisdom about the good life should come from someone who has lived it simply and purely, someone uncorrupted by excess and unshaped by the distortions of extreme privilege. But Ecclesiastes makes the argument implicitly that there is a particular clarity available only to the person who has pursued everything the world offers and arrived at its limits. Solomon had the laboratory that none of the rest of us will ever have. He could test pleasure to its outer edge. He could push wisdom to its furthest reach. He could build on a scale that left nothing untried, accumulate wealth beyond calculation, and pursue knowledge with the resources of an entire kingdom at his disposal. And precisely because his experiment was so thorough, his conclusions carry a weight that no theorizing from a distance could ever produce. He is not guessing about the emptiness at the center of worldly ambition. He has been there. He has walked its corridors and opened every door and looked inside every room and come back to tell us what he found. What he found was not what he hoped for. And the honesty with which he reports his findings is, in itself, one of the most spiritually instructive things about this extraordinary book. Solomon does not spin his disappointments into victories. He does not reframe his emptiness as abundance or dress his disillusionment in the language of success. He tells the truth about what he discovered, and he does so not to condemn life or to produce despair in his reader, but to redirect the human gaze toward the one reality that actually holds, the reality of God, of his sovereignty, of his commandments, of the reverence that is the beginning and the end of all genuine wisdom. This is not a book for pessimists. It is a book for truth seekers. It is not an invitation to give up on life. It is an invitation to stop giving your life to things that are incapable of receiving it properly. It is a call to clarity in the deepest sense, the clarity that comes not from having all the answers, but from finally asking the right questions and being willing to stay with them long enough for wisdom to emerge. In this video, we're going to walk through 33 divine lessons drawn from the book of Ecclesiastes. 33 windows into the mind and heart of the wisest human being who ever lived. 33 encounters with truths that have not aged a day in 3,000 years because they are not rooted in any particular cultural moment, but in the permanent, unalterable nature of God and humanity and the relationship between them. These lessons will challenge you. Some of them will make you uncomfortable. A few of them will feel like a hand reaching into your chest and rearranging something that needed to be rearranged. All of them, received with an open and honest heart, have the power to produce in you the clarity that the chaos of our age is working so hard to deny you. Before we begin this journey through one of Scripture's most extraordinary books, I want to pause and speak to you directly, person to person, across whatever distance separates us in geography and circumstance. If you are watching this video right now, whether you are in a city in the United States where the day is just beginning and your coffee is still hot, or in the United Kingdom where the afternoon light is already going golden, or in Australia where the evening is settling in, or in Canada, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, India, Brazil, the Philippines, or anywhere else in this wide and astonishing world, I want you to know that your presence here is not an accident. The fact that something drew you to this video, that something in you is hungry for depth and wisdom and the genuine Word of God, is itself a kind of grace. And I want you to be part of this community in the fullest sense. So please, right now, drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us your city, your country, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. There is something genuinely moving, something that consistently fills me with awe about seeing the comment section of these videos become a roll call of God's people from every corner of the earth, sitting together in the middle of different time zones and different seasons and different personal circumstances. Gathered around the same ancient word, you are not watching this alone. There are thousands of others who have found this channel and made it their home, who come here regularly to have their faith strengthened and their minds sharpened and their hearts pointed back toward God. You belong in that number, and I want to ask you something earnestly, sincerely, from the absolute center of what this channel is about. If you have not yet subscribed, please do it now. I'm not asking as a formality, not ticking a box in a content creator's checklist. I'm asking because this community is real, and your place in it matters, and subscribing is how you stay connected to every video we release. Every single thing we produce on this channel is made with prayer, with careful attention to Scripture, and with one unwavering purpose: to help you know God more deeply, walk more faithfully, and live with the kind of wisdom that holds when everything else is shaking. You should not miss a single one. Subscribe, turn on your notifications, and make this channel a regular part of how you engage with the Word of God. And if you would like to go even deeper, to become part of this community at the most direct level, consider becoming a channel member. Members get early access to our videos before they go public, and they become part of an inner circle of people who are genuinely committed to this shared journey of faith and wisdom. Whatever level of involvement feels right to you, know this: your presence here matters, your faith matters, your hunger for God matters. Now, let us open Ecclesiastes and let it speak. Lesson 1. All is vapor, and that is the beginning of wisdom, not the end of it. Ecclesiastes 1:2. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities. All is vanity. There is no gentler opening in the book of Ecclesiastes. The very first substantial statement the preacher makes, after identifying himself and his credentials, is this declaration that everything is vanity, and he makes it with a doubling and a repetition that in the Hebrew literary tradition signals the highest possible degree of emphasis. Vanity of vanities, the superlative of superlatives. As if the single word were not enough, as if any possible ambiguity needed to be burned away immediately so that the reader could not skip past this statement toward more comfortable territory without first sitting with its full force. The Hebrew word at the center of this verse is Hebel, and its translation into the English word vanity has, over centuries, loaded it with connotations it does not entirely deserve. When modern readers encounter vanity, they may think of pride or self-absorption, the vanity of someone who spends too long in front of the mirror. But Hebel carries none of that meaning. It means breath, vapor, the kind of mist that forms on a cold morning and is gone before you have finished looking at it. It means something that is real. It genuinely exists. You can genuinely see it and experience it. But that cannot be held, cannot be made permanent, cannot be used as a foundation, because it dissipates the moment you try to build on it. This is what Solomon is saying about life as most people pursue it. Not that life is disgusting or contemptible or without genuine value. He's not preaching nihilism, he is preaching impermanence. He is observing that the things we typically build our sense of meaning and security on, achievement, pleasure, wealth, the esteem of others, the legacy we create, all share this quality of Hebel. They are real while you have them. They genuinely deliver certain kinds of satisfaction while they last. But they do not last, and they cannot ultimately bear the weight of the questions they are so often asked to answer. Who am I? What does my life mean? Is any of this worth it? What will remain of me when I am gone? Here is the grace that is hidden in this seemingly bleak opening. Recognizing the vapor quality of earthly things is not the end of wisdom. It is the beginning of it. The person who understands Hebel is freed from the exhausting and ultimately futile project of demanding that the temporary become permanent, of insisting that what is fleeting provide the security that only what is eternal can give. This recognition does not produce despair in the person who receives it rightly. It produces freedom. It produces the ability to hold the good things of life with gratitude and open hands, enjoying them fully while they are present without being destroyed when they pass. The person who grasps Hebel does not stop working or loving or building or creating. They do all of these things, but they do them with a different posture, lighter, freer, more oriented toward God and eternity than toward the accumulation of vapor. Everything worth anything in Ecclesiastes flows from this opening recognition. Receive it not as bad news, but as the news that liberates. Lesson 2. The world's restlessness is an invitation to find your stillness in God. Ecclesiastes 1:4-7. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Read those verses at the pace they deserve, which is to say slowly, and notice what they are describing at the level of pure observation before you reach for the interpretation. The sun rises, completes its arc across the sky, sets, and then, in one of the most evocative phrases in the entire book, hastens back to its place so that it can rise again. The wind moves south, then swings north, circling without ceasing. The rivers pour themselves into the sea continuously, and yet the sea is never filled, and the rivers never stop. And generation after generation of human beings is born, lives and dies, while the earth itself continues on, unchanged beneath them. There is a dizzying quality to this passage if you let it fully register. The world is in perpetual motion, cycling and churning through patterns that do not resolve, processes that do not conclude, a rhythm that goes on and on without arriving anywhere final. Solomon is not describing this as something exotic or distant. He is describing what happens every single day, what has happened every single day since creation, what will continue happening regardless of what any individual human being does or fails to do. The world's restlessness is fundamental. It is baked in, but here is the crucial question the passage implicitly raises. Does that mean you must be restless too? The sun cannot stop. The wind cannot pause, the rivers cannot cease flowing, but you are not the sun, and you are not the wind, and you are not a river. You are a creature made in the image of a God who rested on the seventh day, who built rest into the very architecture of creation, who later commanded his people to cease their labor one day in 7 and be still before him. The world's relentless cycling is not a blueprint for your inner life. It is, if anything, the contrast against which the possibility of genuine stillness becomes most vivid and most valuable. Psalm 46 will say it directly, "Be still and know that I am God." That command assumes a world that is not still, a world of nations raging and mountains being carried into the sea, and locates the practice of stillness not in the absence of external turmoil, but in the presence of God in the midst of it. Ecclesiastes plants the seed for that great truth. The world churns, but the person who has found their anchor in God carries a stillness inside them that the world cannot manufacture and cannot take away. Find that stillness. Cultivate it deliberately. Protect it aggressively. It is one of the rarest and most precious things available to a human being in this age. Lesson 3. Knowledge without God multiplies grief. Anchor your wisdom to its source. Ecclesiastes 1:18. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. This verse lands differently depending on where you are standing when you receive it. If you are young and in the early stages of intellectual formation, it may sound like a warning to be suspicious of education, a counsel against the pursuit of understanding. But Solomon is doing something far more sophisticated and far more honest than that. He is reporting the result of a specific experiment, the pursuit of wisdom as an end in itself, the accumulation of knowledge as a project whose ultimate purpose was wisdom for wisdom's sake, rather than wisdom in service of God and neighbor. And the result of that specific experiment, conducted at the highest possible level by the person best equipped in history to conduct it, was grief. To understand why, you need only to think honestly about what deep knowledge actually reveals. The more clearly you see the world, the more you are confronted with its brokenness, the more you understand about human nature, the more you grasp the depths of the cruelty, the selfishness, the capacity for self-deception that human beings are capable of. The more history you know, the more patterns of injustice and suffering you recognize cycling through century after century without resolution. The more science you understand, the more you are confronted with the enormous complexity and fragility of the systems that sustain life. Knowledge, pursued honestly, reveals problems in far greater proportion than it delivers solutions. It is a lens that brings the full scope of the world's pain into focus without necessarily providing the framework within which that pain can be borne. This is the grief Solomon encountered. Not ignorant grief, Not the grief of someone stumbling through darkness, but the grief of someone who can see everything clearly and is therefore aware of how much is broken. It is, in a strange way, the most honest grief available. The grief of unfiltered reality, unmediated by the comforting illusions that ignorance provides. But here is the antidote that Ecclesiastes itself, across its full length, provides. Wisdom that is anchored to the fear of God does not merely reveal the problem. It provides the context within which the problem can be held. When knowledge is pursued in reverence before the Lord, the grief it reveals is not the final word. It is placed within a larger story, the story of a God who sees the brokenness even more clearly than we do, who is not indifferent to it, who is actively at work in history and in human hearts, and who has promised to make all things new. That context does not eliminate the grief, but it gives it somewhere to go. It transforms mourning into intercession, clear-eyed sorrow into purposeful action, the weight of knowing into the fuel of faithful engagement with a broken world. Pursue wisdom with all your heart, but pursue it in the fear of God and watch it become a gift rather than a burden. Lesson 4. Pleasure is a beautiful gift and a terrible master. Ecclesiastes 2, 1-2. I said in mine heart, Go to now, I will prove thee with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, It is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? The experiment Solomon describes in the opening chapters of Ecclesiastes is conducted with such thoroughness that it reads almost like a scientific protocol. He does not merely theorize about pleasure, he submits himself fully to it. He gives himself to wine while maintaining his observing wisdom. He builds great projects, plants gardens, collects singers and the pleasures of the senses, acquires herds and flocks and the treasure of kings. He denies himself nothing that his eyes desire and nothing that would give his heart joy. He is not a dilettante in the pursuit of pleasure. He is a fully committed explorer who has mapped its entire territory. And then he sits down and writes his report. The report is not that pleasure is evil. Solomon does not come back from his experiment condemning enjoyment or warning against beauty or insisting that the senses are a trap to be avoided. He comes back with something far more nuanced and far more useful. The observation that pleasure, as a final destination and a primary source of meaning, fails to deliver what it promises. It is real, it is good in its proper place, but it cannot answer the questions that the soul keeps asking because it was never designed to. You can spend an entire lifetime pursuing happiness as a project and discover at the end of it that happiness is not something that submits to being pursued directly. It arrives as a byproduct of living well, not as the trophy for living most pleasurably. Every generation needs to hear this, and perhaps our generation needs to hear it more urgently than most. We are the most entertained, the most stimulated, the most pleasure-saturated civilization in history. The infrastructure of enjoyment available to the average person in the developed world today would have seemed incomprehensibly extravagant to the wealthiest person of any previous era. And yet the data on human well-being, on rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, addiction, and existential meaninglessness tells a story that Ecclesiastes would recognize immediately. More pleasure has not produced more flourishing. The appetites, fed more richly than ever before, have grown rather than quieted. The restlessness has intensified rather than resolved. Augustine, writing from a completely different direction 1500 years after Solomon, arrived at precisely the same destination. Our heart is restless until it rests in thee. The soul has an appetite that pleasure cannot satisfy because the appetite was not designed for pleasure. It was designed for God. Pleasure is one of the beautiful gifts that flow from a life rightly ordered toward its Creator. As an end in itself, it is a road that loops back to its own beginning, always arriving at hunger, never arriving at home. Enjoy the gifts, but do not mistake the gifts for the giver or the shadow for the substance. Lesson 5. Work is sacred, but only when it flows from God rather than running toward it. Ecclesiastes 2:17-18. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor wherein I had labored under the sun, seeing that I must leave it unto the man that shall be after me. The emotional intensity of this passage is striking even by the standards of Ecclesiastes, which is not a book that typically trades in mild understatement. Solomon hated life. He hated his labor. These are strong words from a man who was famously wise, famously capable, famously accomplished on a scale that almost no other person in history can claim. To hear him speak of hatred toward the projects that represented the greatest achievements of his extraordinary life is to be genuinely confronted with the inadequacy of achievement as a source of lasting meaning. The specific grief that triggers this passage is the realization that he will have to leave it all behind. Everything he built, the temples, the palaces, the gardens, the enterprises, the accumulated wealth and wisdom of a lifetime, will pass to someone he cannot control, someone who may be a fool, someone who may undo in a generation what he labored to build over an entire lifetime. The fruit of his greatest efforts will belong to a stranger. And from that perspective, the whole enterprise suddenly looks different. The effort that felt meaningful while it was ongoing reveals itself, from the vantage point of its inevitable ending, to have been, in a certain sense, temporary in a way that does not sit comfortably with the significance it was assigned while it was happening. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths that Ecclesiastes forces us to sit with, and it is one that our culture is particularly poorly equipped to handle because we have made work not merely an activity, but an identity. When what you do becomes who you are, when your career is yourself, when your achievements are your worth, when your productivity is your value, then the inevitable impermanence of your work becomes an existential threat, rather than a simple fact of life. The person for whom work is identity cannot retire without a sense of annihilation. They cannot fail without a sense of complete self-destruction. They cannot step back, hand over or let go without mourning something that feels more like death than transition. But work was not designed to carry the weight of identity. It was designed to be an act of worship, the offering of your God-given gifts and energies back to the God who supplied them. In the service of the people he has placed around you, for the glory he is building in history. When work flows from that understanding, it retains its dignity without requiring permanence in order to be meaningful. You can build excellently and release graciously. You can invest fully and hold lightly. You can labor diligently and entrust the results to God without being destroyed by the possibility that those results may not endure in the form you intended. The work is not Hebel. The way you have been relating to it might be. Lesson 6. There is a season for everything. Stop fighting the timing of God. Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Perhaps no passage in Ecclesiastes is more universally recognized. These verses have been quoted at graduations and funerals, set to music, inscribed on walls, and cited in speeches for centuries. Their beauty is undeniable, But familiarity is one of the most effective enemies of genuine engagement with Scripture, and it is worth making the effort to encounter these words freshly, to feel the weight of what they are actually saying rather than simply appreciating the elegance with which they say it. Solomon is describing the temporal architecture of human life, the built-in rhythm of seasons and purposes that God has woven into the fabric of existence. And what is striking, if you read the full list, is that it includes everything: the comfortable and the painful, the joyful and the grievous, the productive and the fallow, the constructive and the deconstructive, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to build up and a time to break down, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to keep and a time to throw away. There is no activity or experience on Solomon's list that is purely positive or purely negative. Every one of them has its season, and every season has its purpose. This is not a teaching about fatalism, the passive acceptance of whatever comes as if nothing you do makes any difference. Solomon is not saying that effort is pointless because everything is predetermined. He is saying something quite different and considerably more liberating, that the posture of wisdom toward time is not one of frantic resistance to whatever season you are currently in, but of discernment, the ability to recognize what season you are actually in and to respond to it appropriately, rather than spending your energy fighting against it. The anxiety of modern life is often, at its root, an anxiety about timing. We want the harvest before we have finished planting. We want to skip the season of mourning and arrive directly at dancing. We want the answers before we have sat long enough in the questions for them to do their work. We want the fruit that comes only at the end of a long, disciplined process of growth to arrive on the timeline we have set, rather than the timeline God has appointed. And the result of that constant resistance to God's timing is an exhaustion that no amount of effort can relieve, because the effort is being directed against the current rather than with it. The wisdom of this passage is the wisdom of surrender, not the passive surrender of someone who has given up, but the active, discerning surrender of someone who has learned to ask not just, "What do I want?" but "What season is this, and what does this season require of me?" That question, consistently asked and honestly answered, is one of the most practically transformative spiritual disciplines available to any person who is willing to practice it. Lesson 7. God has set eternity in your heart. That ache is not a mistake. Ecclesiastes 3:11. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. Of all the verses in Ecclesiastes, this one may carry the most compressed theological depth per word. It begins with an affirmation that seems, at first, almost too simple. God has made everything beautiful in its time. Given the catalogue of grief and frustration that has preceded this verse, the vanity of achievement, the grief of wisdom, the impermanence of pleasure, the cycling restlessness of the world, this affirmation is itself an act of extraordinary faith. Everything beautiful in its time. Not everything is beautiful at the moment it is happening. Not everything makes sense while it is unfolding. But in its time, in the fullness of the season God has appointed for it, within the larger frame of the story God is telling, everything he has made and ordained carries a beauty that will eventually be visible. But the second clause of this verse is where the real depth lives. God has set eternity, olam in the Hebrew, the word for the age-long, the forever, the beyond time, in the human heart. Every person who has ever lived carries within them a longing for something that the temporal world cannot supply. A hunger for the permanent in a world of Habel, an ache for the infinite in an existence bounded by birth and death. A persistent nagging awareness that there must be more than what the eye can see, more than what the hands can build, more than what any earthly achievement or pleasure or relationship can provide. This longing is not evidence of dysfunction. It is not the symptom of a disordered psychology or a failure of adjustment to the real world. It is, in Solomon's understanding, the most fundamental evidence of design. God put it there. He planted eternity in the human heart with full knowledge that the temporal world would never be able to satisfy it, because he intended to be the satisfaction himself. The hunger is the homing signal. The ache is the evidence of what you were made for. The restlessness that no earthly thing can quiet is the proof that you were designed for something no earthly thing can provide. The second part of the verse acknowledges the necessary limitation that comes with this gift. No human being can fully comprehend the work that God is doing from beginning to end. The eternity placed in your heart is enough to orient you toward God, but not enough to give you God's vantage point. You carry eternity as a longing and a direction, not as a complete map. This is precisely the space in which faith lives, not in the gap where understanding has simply not arrived yet, but in the permanent human condition of being oriented toward what exceeds your grasp. That orientation is not a deficiency, it is the entire point. Lesson 8. Divine justice exists. Trust it when human justice fails you. Ecclesiastes 3:16-17. And moreover I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. Solomon does not look away. One of the most consistent and striking characteristics of Ecclesiastes is its refusal to pretend that the world is better than it is, to smooth over the jagged edges of human experience in the interest of making its theology look tidier or more immediately satisfying. Here he looks directly at one of the most troubling realities of life under the sun, the corruption of the very institutions designed to administer justice. The place of judgment, the court, the hall of law, the seat of authority, harbors wickedness. The place that should be the refuge of the righteous hosts iniquity. The systems designed to protect the vulnerable are used to exploit them. The structures built to enforce fairness become instruments of unfairness in the hands of the powerful and the corrupt. If you have ever been on the wrong end of an unjust system, you know the specific quality of this grief. It is not the grief of ordinary difficulty or random misfortune. It is something more bitter because it involves the betrayal of an expectation that justice is supposed to fulfill. It is the grief of a person who went to the place that was supposed to help and found that the help was not available, either because the system was broken or because the system was being deliberately used against them, or because power and money and connection had already determined the outcome before the process began. Solomon sees this reality and neither explains it away nor drowns in it. Instead, he anchors himself in the bedrock conviction that has supported the faithful in every generation. God will judge the righteous and the wicked, all of it. Every courtroom decision that was bought and paid for, every verdict that was determined by privilege rather than truth, every instance of power used to crush the powerless. None of it escapes the notice of the God who is the ultimate and final judge of all the earth. His justice does not move at the speed of human courts. It does not operate according to the limitations of human evidence and human argument. It is comprehensive, it is infallible, and it is certain. This conviction is what has sustained the faithful through centuries of oppression, injustice, and abuse. It is not passivity. Those who trust in divine justice are often the most committed workers for human justice, sustained by confidence in ultimate outcomes that the person without that anchor cannot maintain indefinitely. It is the faith that does not require the injustice to be resolved today in order to continue working against it tomorrow, because it knows that the resolution is coming, that the judge of all the earth will do right, and that nothing done in darkness has been done out of his sight. Lesson 9. You were not made to be alone. Invest in the people God has placed near you. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. After the philosophical rigor and existential weight of the preceding chapters, this passage arrives with a quality that is almost disarmingly simple. Two are better than one. The imagery Solomon employs is domestic, immediate, and accessible in a way that feels deliberately grounded. A person who falls and has someone to help them up. Two people who share warmth on a cold night. A threefold cord that resists breaking under pressure. These are not grand theological propositions. They are the ordinary, irreplaceable realities of human community, offered by a man who had everything the world could supply, and who recognized in the end that what he was describing in these simple images was among the most valuable things available to any person, regardless of their wealth or status or achievement. The context of this passage matters. Immediately before it, Solomon has been observing the futility of the person who works endlessly in isolation, who labors without rest or companion, or the ability to say to whom this labor is being directed. He watches someone work themselves to exhaustion without ever pausing to ask who they are working for, what they are building toward, who will share in what they have created. And the observation he makes is quietly devastating. This too is vanity and a grievous task. The person who lives and works and strives entirely alone, refusing the vulnerability of genuine relationship, is not stronger for their independence. They are poorer, more fragile, and more exposed than they recognize. Human beings were made for relationship, not the casual, surface-level connection of digital networks, though there can be genuine community in digital spaces when the depth is present. Not the transactional relationships that we call professional connections. The real kind. The kind where someone knows your actual name and your actual struggles and shows up when you fall with no agenda other than to help you stand again. The kind that generates genuine warmth, not the performed warmth of people who are trying to impress each other, but the real heat of two human beings who have chosen to be present to one another without pretense. Invest in these relationships, build them with patience and honesty and the willingness to be known and to know. They are among the most anti-vapor things in a world full of vapor. They are one of the places where something genuinely lasting can be built between people who give themselves to one another with fidelity and care. And note the conclusion. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. The cord with God woven through it, the friendship or the marriage or the community of faith where the Lord is present at the center. This is the most resilient of all the bonds available to human beings. Build that. Lesson 10. Approach God with reverence. Let your words before him be fewer and deeper. Ecclesiastes 5:1-2. Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. For they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. This passage delivers one of the most startling and countercultural messages in the entire book, and given how countercultural Ecclesiastes is throughout, that is not a small claim. We live in an age of performative spirituality, An age in which the volume and length and theatricality of religious expression is frequently mistaken for its depth and authenticity. The louder the prayer, the more impressive the language, the more emotionally dramatic the worship experience, the more spiritually significant it is assumed to be. Solomon has watched this dynamic and named it with elegant precision, the sacrifice of fools. Not because emotion or passion in prayer is wrong, but because the prayer that substitutes noise for substance, performance for genuine encounter, the impressive arrangement of religious words for the honest exposure of the soul before its maker, is not worship, it is performance, and the audience for performance is human beings, not God. Solomon's prescription is bracingly simple: be more ready to hear than to speak. Come to the presence of God with the posture of a listener before you adopt the posture of a speaker. Before you bring your requests and your praises and your carefully constructed phrases, allow for the possibility that the God who made you and knows you completely has something he wants to say to you, and that you will not be able to hear it if your mouth is already producing so much sound that there is no quiet in which his voice could be recognized. The second instruction builds on the first. Let your words be few, not because God is distant and will not hear the long prayer, not because he is impatient with the extended wrestling of a heart that is working through something real and difficult before him. The Psalms are full of exactly that kind of prayer, and God receives every word of it. The counsel to let your words be few is not a rule about the length of prayer. It is a counsel about the quality of approach. It is the reminder that you are a creature approaching the Creator, a finite person speaking to the infinite, a human being whose perspective is limited by its humanity, standing before the God whose perspective encompasses everything. That proportion, that immense, beautiful, humbling proportion, should shape the way you arrive. Not with the easy confidence of someone who fully understands the God they are addressing, but with the reverent, attentive, listening posture of someone who knows they are on holy ground. Lesson 11. The love of money is a hole with no bottom. Ecclesiastes 5:10-11. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owner thereof, saving the beholding of them with his eyes? Few observations in Ecclesiastes are more empirically verifiable than this one, and yet few are more persistently ignored. The person who loves money will not be satisfied by more money. The person who loves abundance will not be satisfied by greater abundance. This is not a moral judgment dressed up as a psychological observation. It is simply an accurate description of how the appetite for wealth works, reported by someone who had the means to test it thoroughly. Wealth satisfies the needs it was designed to meet. It buys food and shelter and security and opportunity. But it does not satisfy the love of wealth. That appetite grows in direct proportion to its feeding, because what is being fed is not a genuine need, but an ordering of the heart that has gone wrong. And then Solomon adds a wickedly perceptive observation in the second verse. When wealth increases, so do the people who come to consume it. More money means more people with claims on it, more expenses, more obligations, more demands, more mouths that appear as if by some natural law of expansion. The wealthy person looks at their wealth, and what do they get from it? Solomon asks, beyond the sight of it, the seeing alone, the knowledge that it exists. A kind of numerical comfort that provides no warmth, no meaning, no answer to the questions that keep human beings awake at 3 a.m. There is a particular cruelty to the love of money that Solomon is identifying. It works against itself. The more you have, the more you are aware of what you do not have. The more you accumulate, The more you understand the fragility of accumulation, the more you fear its loss, the more energy you must devote to its protection, the less free you are to enjoy the life you were supposedly accumulating it for. Wealth accumulated in the service of generous living, of family flourishing, of God's purposes in the world, of the well-being of those around you. This is wealth that can be genuinely satisfying because it is flowing rather than hoarding. But wealth as a love object, wealth as the ground of security and identity, wealth as the thing that will finally make you feel safe enough and significant enough and free enough. This is a prison with comfortable furnishings, and the longer you live in it, the harder it becomes to remember that there is a door. Lesson 12. A good name is the most valuable asset you will ever build. Ecclesiastes 7:1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. In the ancient Near Eastern world, precious ointment was not a luxury product in the modern sense. It was a symbol of the highest honor and consecration, used in the anointing of kings and priests, the preparation of offerings, the most sacred acts of worship and ceremony. To compare a good name favorably against precious ointment is to place it at the very summit of what was considered most valuable in Solomon's world. He is not saying that reputation is somewhat preferable to wealth in a mild, all things being equal kind of way. He is saying it is categorically superior, that what people genuinely know and say about your character when the social performances are stripped away is worth more than anything you could accumulate or inherit or be given by anyone in any form. We live in an era that has professionalized image management to a degree that previous generations could not have imagined. Personal branding is now an entire industry, with consultants and strategies and tools devoted to the crafting of a public persona. And there is nothing inherently wrong with wanting to present yourself well, with caring about how you communicate and how you are perceived in professional and public contexts. But Solomon is pointing to something that personal branding cannot produce and cannot substitute for: the genuine reputation that comes from a life of actual integrity, consistently lived in private as much as in public, with people who have no particular incentive to flatter you. A good name, in Solomon's sense, is built entirely in the accumulated details of ordinary life. It is built in how you treat the person who can do nothing for you, the service worker, the junior colleague, the stranger in a moment of need. It is built in whether you keep your word when keeping it is inconvenient. It is built in how you handle situations where dishonesty would be easy and undetected and genuinely advantageous. It is built in whether the private version of you is recognizable from the public version, or whether the gap between them has grown so wide that those who know you intimately are strangers to those who know you publicly. That kind of name cannot be manufactured quickly. It is assembled over years and decades, one decision at a time, and the process is invisible to everyone except God and those who know you closest. But it is the most durable thing you will ever build, and it is one of the very few things that Ecclesiastes identifies as genuinely better than something else, rather than merely equally vaporous. Guard it accordingly. Lesson 13. The house of mourning has lessons. The house of feasting cannot teach. Ecclesiastes 7:2-4. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. This passage is among the most counterintuitive in all of Scripture, and its difficulty is intentional. Solomon is not offering a gentle preference for the contemplative over the celebratory. He's making a sharp, direct claim. It is better genuinely, specifically in terms of what it does for you and what it makes of you, to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. Sorrow is better than laughter. The heart of the wise lives in the house of mourning. These are challenging words, and the temptation to soften them, to find a reading that allows us to retain our preference for comfort and celebration without fully engaging with what they are actually saying, is real and should be resisted. Here is the truth beneath the challenge. The house of mourning is not a comfortable place, but it is an honest one. When you stand at a graveside, when you sit with genuine grief, when you allow loss and sorrow to do their full work in your soul without rushing to the other side, something happens to you that does not happen in any other way. Perspective realigns. The things that seemed urgently important, the social anxieties, the professional competitions, the small grievances you have been nursing, the superficial pursuits that have been consuming your best energy, suddenly reveal themselves for what they are. And the things that actually matter, love, relationship, faith, the quality of how you have lived and who you have been to the people God placed near you, suddenly take on a clarity and a weight that the house of feasting, with all its noise and stimulation and distraction, simply cannot produce. The wisdom of this lesson is not that you should seek sorrow or refuse celebration. The feasts of life are genuine gifts, and Ecclesiastes will say so explicitly elsewhere. The wisdom is that the person who is willing to go to the house of mourning and stay there long enough for it to teach what it has to teach, who does not flee from grief into distraction, who does not suppress loss with entertainment, who allows the reality of mortality and impermanence to do its refining work in their soul. That person emerges with a depth of character and a clarity of values that is simply not available to the person who has only ever lived in the house of mirth. Let grief teach you. It is one of the wisest teachers available to any human being, and its curriculum is unlike anything offered anywhere else. Lesson 14. Patience is a greater power than pride will ever be. Ecclesiastes 7:8. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Start with the first clause, and notice how directly it challenges the way we typically think about effort and progress. We celebrate beginnings. We throw launch parties, mark first days, announce new ventures, celebrate the moment when the seed goes into the ground with all the excitement that vision and possibility naturally generate. And that excitement is not wrong. Beginnings deserve recognition, and the energy of a genuine start is a real gift. But Solomon, with his characteristic habit of revaluing things that culture has arranged in the wrong order, says, "The end is better." Not the beginning, with all its energy and enthusiasm and open possibility, but the end, with all its hard-won fruit and proven faithfulness, and the quiet dignity of having actually finished what was started. The end of a thing is where the proof lives. It is where you discover whether the beginning was genuine or merely performed, whether the commitment was real or simply the excitement of novelty, whether the character of the person who started was equal to the demands of the middle and the requirements of the finish. Endings are honest in a way that beginnings are not yet required to be. They show what was actually built rather than what was imagined when the building began. And then the contrast. The patient in spirit is better than the proud. Pride and patience are not simply different emotional tones. They represent fundamentally different orientations toward time and outcomes. Pride needs results now, recognition now, visible progress now, because it is dependent on external feedback to sustain its sense of self. It cannot endure the long middle of any significant project, the season where the initial excitement has entirely faded and the results are nowhere near visible yet, because in that season there is nothing for pride to feed on. But patience, The patient spirit rooted in trust in God is not dependent on external validation to sustain its movement forward. It has a source of sustenance that is independent of results and recognition and the applause of anyone watching. It can walk the long middle because it knows where the end is located and who is holding the outcome. Cultivate patience not as a passive virtue, but as the active, powerful, deeply spiritual alternative to the driven pride that exhausts itself and everyone near it. Lesson 15. Anger that finds a home in you will rebuild the house over and over. Ecclesiastes 7-9. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Solomon is not dismissing all anger. Scripture makes clear that there is such a thing as righteous anger, the moral indignation of a person who sees something genuinely wrong and responds with the appropriate force of conscience. God himself is described throughout Scripture as being moved to anger by injustice, by the oppression of the vulnerable, by the corruption of what was made holy. Anger in its proper form is a signal, like pain. It tells you that something has gone wrong and that a response may be required. What Solomon is describing here is something different. The hasty anger, the hair-trigger reactivity that does not wait for wisdom to arrive before it begins expressing itself. The anger that rises before the mind has engaged. The anger that becomes a habitual resident rather than an occasional visitor, that finds a home in the chest of the fool and lives there, available for deployment at any moment, ready to be triggered by the smallest provocation because the heart that houses it has not been trained to pause between the stimulus and the response. We live in a cultural moment that has made this kind of anger lucrative for the systems that profit from it. Social media platforms are designed at the level of their fundamental architecture to reward outrage. The most inflammatory content receives the most engagement, and engagement is how the platform generates revenue, so the incentive is entirely aligned with keeping you angry. Your anger is being mined. Your reactivity is a natural resource that others are extracting for their benefit, and the cost is borne entirely by you, by the quality of your relationships, the health of your inner life, the clarity of your thinking, and your ability to reflect the character of God to the people around you. The invitation of this verse is the ancient discipline of the pause, the deliberate, countercultural, spiritually significant practice of not responding immediately, of feeling the heat of anger without becoming its instrument, of asking, before you speak or act or post, whether this moment deserves your reactive self or your reflective self. The fool lets anger find a home. The wise person acknowledges the visitor, hears what it has to say, and then decides whether and how to respond, always with the question of what God would have done in this moment as the frame within which the decision is made. Lesson 16. Nostalgia is not wisdom. God is working in your present. Ecclesiastes 7-10. Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. There is a particular kind of unhappiness that Ecclesiastes identifies here. Not the acute grief of a specific loss, not the deep sorrow of genuine tragedy, but the chronic, low-grade discontent of the person who has decided, consciously or otherwise, that the present is inferior to the past and that the best of life is behind them. It is the nostalgia that becomes a worldview, the insistence that things used to be better, that there was a golden era somewhere back there that cannot be recovered, and in whose absence the present is inevitably diminished. Solomon calls it unwise, and given his standards for what counts as wisdom, that is a meaningful verdict. Part of why it is unwise is simply psychological. Memory is not a neutral recording device. It curates. It softens the hard edges and brightens the colors of what it stores, and it tends to do so more generously the further in the past the memory is located. The former days that seem better than these have been edited by time in ways we cannot account for. The hardships that were genuinely present in those times are underrepresented in the memory. The pleasures and freedoms are overrepresented. We are comparing an edited version of the past to an unedited version of the present, and of course, the edited version wins. That is not a fair comparison. It is a distortion. But the deeper reason it is unwise is theological. God is not a God of the past. He is a God of the present, active and working and doing new things in the exact moment you are standing in, regardless of whether that moment feels as significant or as comfortable or as golden as the moments you are comparing it to. Isaiah 43 will sound this same note with the force of a command. Stop dwelling on the former things, for the Lord is doing something new. Do you not perceive it? The person locked in nostalgia is standing in the middle of what God is currently doing and unable to recognize it because they are looking in the wrong direction. Turn around, open your eyes to the present. The God who was faithful in the past is faithful right now in this exact season, building something in you and through you that the former days could not have produced. Lesson 17. Wisdom builds a shelter that money cannot purchase. Ecclesiastes 7:11-12. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there is profit to them that see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense, but the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Solomon is not interested in false dichotomies. He is not going to tell you that money is entirely without value. He is too practically honest for that, and Ecclesiastes will explicitly acknowledge elsewhere that money is a useful tool that solves real problems. But he is also not going to allow wealth to occupy the position in our hierarchy of values that it so naturally gravitates toward in human experience. So he holds both up together, compares them directly, and then marks the crucial distinction with precision. Both wisdom and money offer a kind of defense. Both provide protection against certain categories of threat and difficulty. The protection money offers is real and should not be dismissed, but the protection wisdom offers goes somewhere that money's protection cannot reach. It gives life. Not merely the preservation of life, not merely the provision of the means of sustaining life, but the quality and direction and depth that make life worth sustaining in the first place. This is not an abstract or philosophical distinction. It plays out with ruthless concreteness in the lives of people who have one without the other. The wealthy person who lacks wisdom does not live well. They live dangerously, surrounded by the resources to pursue any impulse, without the discernment to distinguish between the impulses worth pursuing and the ones that will destroy them. History is full of these stories, and they are almost uniformly painful. Talent without discipline, wealth without character, power without wisdom. Every time the outcome is the same. The absence of wisdom turns the advantages into liabilities. By contrast, the person of genuine wisdom who has limited material resources lives with a protection that money cannot buy. They make better decisions because they see more clearly. They maintain better relationships because they understand people more accurately. They navigate difficulty more effectively because they are not dependent on the external conditions being favorable in order to function at their best. They are, in the fullest sense of the word, more alive, more present to what is actually happening, more responsive to what is actually required, more capable of the kind of joy that is available even in hardship. Build your life on wisdom, and build your wisdom on the fear of God, who is its source and its sustainer. Lesson 18. No one is perfectly righteous. Let this truth set you free. Ecclesiastes 7:20. For there is not a just man upon earth that doeth good and sinneth not. You read this verse slowly and let its pastoral generosity land before you process its theological implications. Solomon is not primarily making a doctrinal statement here, though what he says is doctrinally accurate and will be confirmed by Paul in Romans 3 with even greater emphasis. He is speaking with the compassion of someone who has spent a lifetime observing human beings, himself included, and who has arrived at a conclusion that is simultaneously humbling and liberating. Everyone fails. No one is perfectly righteous, not even the most admirable, the most faithful, the most genuinely good people you know. They do good. They genuinely, substantially do good. And they also sin. Not as a minor qualification or an occasional exception, but as a consistent reality of what it means to be a human being in a fallen world, regardless of how devoted to God that human being is. The liberation in this verse is real, and it operates in at least two directions. In the first direction, it frees you from the crushing weight of a perfectionism that holds your failures against you as evidence that you are fundamentally unworthy of grace. You are not uniquely flawed. You are not the one person for whom the mercy of God is insufficient or the grace of community unavailable. The failure you are most ashamed of, the sin you keep returning to, the gap between who you know you should be and who you keep discovering you are. This is not evidence that you are beyond redemption. It is evidence that you are human. Every human being who has ever lived carries this same gap, and the gospel of Jesus Christ was designed for exactly this situation. In the second direction, this verse frees you from the self-righteous expectation that others should be better than they are, that the people you respect and love should not fail in the specific ways they fail, that leaders should be exempt from the frailties of their humanity, that the people who teach you and care for you and serve alongside you should somehow be operating on a different level of consistency than everyone else. They are not. They are human beings who do good and who sin exactly as you do. The person who understands this grace can extend it more freely, receive rebuke more honestly, forgive more readily, and inhabit community with greater realism and greater love than the person who is perpetually shocked and disappointed when the people around them reveal their humanity. We are all, without exception, people in need of grace. Live accordingly in both directions. Lesson 19. Your words are a world you create. Build it well. Ecclesiastes 5:2 and 10:12-14. Be not rash with thy mouth, and the words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. A fool also is full of words. Solomon returns to the subject of speech with a regularity that tells you something important. He considered the governance of the tongue to be among the most practically significant of all the expressions of wisdom. This is not a minor theme in Ecclesiastes. It surfaces repeatedly and from multiple angles, as if Solomon has watched enough lives to know that few things cause more damage or more blessing in the ordinary course of human experience than the words people choose to speak, or not to speak, and the circumstances in which they choose to speak them. The contrast he draws is stark. The words of the wise are gracious. This word in the Hebrew carries the sense of something that produces grace in the person who receives it. Words that heal, that clarify, that build up, that honor the humanity of the person they are addressed to. The wise person uses language as a tool for construction, for connection, for truth-telling that serves the listener rather than merely expressing the speaker. Their words do something good in the world. They create something: understanding, comfort, challenge, direction, reconciliation that would not have existed without them. The fool's words, by contrast, are self-consuming. They swallow up the fool. The beginning is foolishness. reckless, reactive, unconsidered, and the end is mischievous madness. The trajectory of unguarded speech is consistently downward. The person who cannot or will not govern what they say is not merely annoying or imprudent. They are building a life that their own words will eventually undermine. The relationship damaged by a careless remark. The opportunity lost because of an intemperate outburst. The community fractured by gossip or slander that the speaker did not consider carefully enough before releasing. The reputation eroded, slowly and then all at once, by a pattern of speech that revealed a character that people could not ultimately trust. We carry our tongues into every room we enter. The words we're about to speak are the most immediate and most daily expression of who we actually are, not who we intend to be, not who we are in our best moments, but who we are when the reaction comes before the reflection. Every morning, you have the opportunity to decide what kind of words you will release into the world that day. Choose with the awareness that they carry weight and make things, and that what they make, for good or ill, will be the actual legacy of your speech in the lives of the people who receive it. Lesson 20. The watcher of winds will never sow. Step out in faith. Ecclesiastes 11:4. He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. This verse contains one of Ecclesiastes' most practically directed and most immediately applicable pieces of wisdom, and in the age of infinite information and endless analysis paralysis, it has arguably never been more relevant than it is right now. The person who will only sow when the wind is perfectly calm and the clouds are perfectly clear never sows at all, and the person who never sows never reaps. The conclusion is as simple and as devastating as that. We have been given more information than any previous generation, and in many ways, that is a genuine blessing. The ability to research, to investigate, to access expert opinion, to model different outcomes, to gather data before making significant decisions. These are real advantages that careful people can use to make better choices. But there is a point at which preparation becomes procrastination, wearing a responsible mask. There is a point at which the gathering of one more piece of information, the waiting for one more variable to clarify, the careful consideration of one more risk, all of these things become a way of not acting, a form of fear that has learned to disguise itself as prudence. Solomon has watched this pattern play out, and he names it for what it is. He is not advocating recklessness. He is not suggesting that you launch into every venture without any discernment or preparation. He is identifying the specific failure mode of people who are capable of acting but who do not, who watch the wind and regard the clouds and always find a sufficient reason to wait a little longer, to prepare a little more, to be a little more certain before they take the step that God has been waiting for them to take. Faith has always involved acting before complete certainty is available. It has always required taking the step before the full path is visible. Abraham left without knowing where he was going. The disciples left their nets before they understood what they were following Jesus toward. The obedience of faith is almost always the decision made in incomplete information, trusting that the God who issued the invitation knows more about where it leads than you do at the moment of response. Watch the wind long enough and you will always find a reason to wait. So, anyway, the harvest belongs to God. Lesson 21. Sow in the morning and in the evening. Faithful generosity has no off-season. Ecclesiastes 11:6. In the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thine hand. For thou knowest not whether shall prosper either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. The instruction that follows directly from the previous lesson extends it into a principle of persistent, consistent, broadly generous action. Not only should you act despite imperfect conditions, you should act continuously, morning and evening, in the early moments of your capacity and the later moments of your energy, because you do not know in advance which of your efforts will bear fruit and which will not. The uncertainty that the previous verse refused to allow as an excuse for inaction becomes here a reason for generosity of effort. Since you cannot predict which seeds will flourish, the response of wisdom is to sow as many as possible, with as much faithfulness as you can sustain. This principle applies to virtually every domain of meaningful human activity. In your relationships, the kind word offered when you are tired, the conversation you made time for when you had other things to do, the prayer you prayed for someone who will never know you prayed it. You do not know which of these will be the one that matters most to them at a crucial moment in their life, which will be the thing they remember decades later as the turning point. So you offer all of them morning and evening without holding back because the return is uncertain. In your work for God's kingdom, the teaching you prepare carefully for a small audience, the contribution you make when no one is watching to see whether you make it, the faithful, unglamorous service rendered in the background of someone else's ministry or someone else's moment. You do not know how God will use any of it. You know only that you are called to sow with faithfulness and leave the harvest entirely to Him. In the economy of God, nothing offered in genuine love and genuine obedience is ever wasted. The seed you sow this morning may produce its fruit years from now, in circumstances you cannot imagine, through channels you will never trace. Sow it anyway. Sow it consistently. Let faithful generosity become the posture of your life, and trust God with every result. Lesson 22. The race is not always to the fastest. Release your grip on outcomes. Ecclesiastes 9:11. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Solomon sits down here with one of the most uncomfortable truths in all of wisdom literature and refuses to look away from it. Life does not consistently reward what we expect it to reward. The fastest does not always win the race. The strongest does not always win the battle. The wisest does not always get the bread. The most perceptive does not always accumulate the riches. The most skilled does not always receive the recognition. Time and chance, factors entirely outside the control of the individual competing in the race, happen to everyone, and their effects can overturn every advantage that preparation and talent and effort would otherwise provide. This is not fatalism. Solomon does not conclude from this observation that effort is pointless, that preparation is irrelevant, or that wisdom confers no advantage. The very fact that he has spent this entire book building the case for wisdom and against foolishness demonstrates that he believes wisdom has genuine value and that it matters enormously how you live and what you choose and how you develop your character and understanding. But he is absolutely clear that wisdom and effort do not constitute a guarantee of outcomes. They constitute a genuine advantage that can still be overturned by forces beyond your control. Why is this liberating rather than simply discouraging? Because the illusion that outcomes are entirely within your control, that if you are talented enough, prepared enough, strategic enough, faithful enough, you can guarantee results, is one of the heaviest burdens that a person can carry. It turns every disappointment into personal failure. It makes every setback evidence that you did not try hard enough, were not good enough, did not have enough faith. It makes you responsible, not just for your effort and your character, which you genuinely are responsible for, but for the outcomes of your effort and character, which belong to God. Release that second responsibility. It was never yours to carry. Run your best race. Prepare with diligence and wisdom. Bring everything you have to what you have been given to do, and then open your hands and let God be sovereign over what happens next. Lesson 23. Do what is before you with everything you have. Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. If any single verse in Ecclesiastes could be extracted and placed on the wall of every home, every school, every place of work, and every house of worship, this one makes a strong case. It is simultaneously the most urgent and the most liberating directive in the book, possibly in all of wisdom literature. Do what your hand finds to do. Do it with all your might, because the time available to do it is limited, and the limit is real, and the grave where all earthly doing ends is not theoretical. Notice the framing. What your hand finds to do, not what you wish you were doing, not the grand assignment you are waiting for before you bring your full effort to bear. Not the ideal circumstances that would finally justify giving everything. What your hand actually finds, the actual, present, imperfect, possibly not quite what you imagine situation in front of you right now. That is where your full strength is required, because that is what you actually have. The person waiting for the perfect opportunity to give everything is rarely giving anything to the imperfect opportunity currently in front of them. And the perfect opportunity, it turns out, very rarely arrives on schedule. The urgency the second clause adds is not meant to produce anxiety. The reality of death in Ecclesiastes is consistently deployed not to frighten, but to clarify. When you genuinely internalize the finitude of your days, not as an abstract theological proposition, but as a lived reality that shapes how you regard the hours available to you, the transformation in your relationship to time is remarkable. The petty resentment you have been feeding starts to seem very small in comparison to the available hours that could be spent on something that genuinely matters. The fear that has been keeping you from the thing God has put before you starts to seem less compelling than the regret of arriving at the end with your capacity for service and love and work unconsumed. Live with your whole self. Work with your full strength. Love without reservation. Do it now, while the hands are strong, as a grateful and wholehearted offering to the God who gave you both the hands and the work they were designed to do. Lesson 24. A little folly can undo years of wisdom. Guard what you have built. Ecclesiastes 10:1. Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savour. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honour. The image is visceral and deliberately so. Solomon wants it to be memorable, because the lesson it carries is one that people have the greatest difficulty receiving and the greatest need to hear. A jar of precious, carefully compounded perfume, the kind of ointment that represents significant craft and significant value, is entirely ruined by a single dead fly. The flies do not need to be numerous. They do not need to be large. A single one, small enough to overlook, dead enough not to be noticed until the damage is done, is sufficient to turn something precious into something revolting. The ratio of harm to cause is brutally disproportionate. Solomon applies this image to the relationship between wisdom and folly in a person's life and reputation. Years of genuine wisdom, faithfully built and consistently demonstrated, can be significantly damaged by a small act of folly. One moment of dishonesty, one act of cruelty, one decision made in a compromised state, one instance where the private person behaved in a way that the public persona would not have recognized. The disproportionality works in the direction of harm, as it always does. The trust that takes years to build can be significantly damaged in a single moment of its betrayal. The reputation that has been carefully and honestly earned can sustain a wound in seconds that requires years to heal, if it heals at all. This is not meant to produce a paralyzing perfectionism that prevents action from fear of making any mistake. God's grace covers the honest failures of those who walk humbly with Him, and a genuine mistake acknowledged with humility and genuine course correction is not the same as the dead fly that the verse is describing. What Solomon is pointing to is more specifically the complacency that comes with success, the assumption that a reputation for wisdom is now durable enough to sustain a little indulgence, that the foundation is secure enough to bear the weight of a small compromise, that the years of integrity have built up enough credit to cover a withdrawal of principle. That assumption is always wrong, because character does not work on credit. Every moment is its own test, and every test is answered by the choice made in it. Guard what you have built. The flies are always small. The damage they do is never proportionate to their size. Lesson 25. Sharpen the axe before you swing it. Wisdom redirects wasted effort. Ecclesiastes 10:10. If the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. There is a deceptive quality to this verse because it sounds so simple, almost too simple to contain real wisdom. And yet the principle it articulates cuts to the center of one of the most persistent and costly mistakes that earnest, hard-working, genuinely motivated people make. The mistake of substituting effort for preparation, of compensating for the lack of the right approach with greater intensity of the wrong approach. If your axe is blunt and you do not sharpen it, you swing harder. And swinging harder with a blunt axe is more tiring, less effective, and more likely to result in the wrong outcome than swinging correctly with a sharp one. In practical terms, the sharpening of the axe is whatever it is that makes your effort actually effective rather than merely energetic. For the student, it is the kind of studying that produces understanding rather than the kind that produces the appearance of studying. For the leader, it is the investment in self-knowledge and genuine development of character that makes decisions better rather than the accumulation of techniques for projecting authority. For the person of faith, it is the daily time in prayer and scripture that keeps the inner life aligned with God, rather than the performance of religious activity that produces the appearance of devotion without its substance. Our culture has a deep and specific problem with this particular lesson, because the culture glorifies the swing and has very little patience for the sharpening. It awards visible effort. It celebrates the person who grinds without ceasing, who never stops, who pushes past every limitation through sheer force of will. It has much less to say about the wisdom of strategic pause, of honest self-assessment, of the willingness to stop and ask whether the axe is actually sharp enough for the work that needs to be done. Solomon has no patience for the cult of unexamined effort. He understands that direction matters more than velocity, that preparation multiplies effectiveness in a way that intensity alone never can, and that the wisest thing you can do before the next great push of effort is to ensure that the instrument of that effort is actually equal to the task at hand. Lesson 26. Light and darkness are not equal. Choose wisdom deliberately every day. Ecclesiastes 2:32-14. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness, and I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Solomon employs here the most elemental contrast available in human experience, light and darkness, and places wisdom and folly at its two poles. The comparison is not mild or nuanced or balanced between positives and negatives. Light and darkness are not two valid options between which a person might reasonably choose based on preference. Light allows you to see where you are going and to navigate safely. Darkness hides the obstacles, conceals the drop-offs, removes the context needed for safe movement, and leaves the person walking in it dependent on luck rather than discernment. The wise person sees. The fool walks in darkness. That is the entire comparison, and the gap between them is as large as the gap between the conditions it describes. And yet, and this is the characteristically Solomonic move that prevents simple triumphalism, even this vast gap does not produce a difference in ultimate destination. Both the wise and the fool die. The one event that ends all earthly experience happens to both, regardless of how much better the wise person has navigated the journey toward it. This is not meant to equalize wisdom and folly. Solomon is not saying that it does not matter which one you choose. He is saying something more subtle. Wisdom does not change the fact that you will die. It changes everything about how you live between now and then, everything about the quality of the journey, the depth of the relationships, the integrity of the choices, the genuine fruitfulness of the work, but it does not purchase immortality. This is the sober realism that Ecclesiastes consistently brings to even its most affirmative declarations. Yes, wisdom is incomparably better than folly. Yes, it is light to darkness. Yes, it transforms the quality of everything about a human life, and also, it does not make you God. It does not give you ultimate control over your circumstances, or your outcomes, or your final destination. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, precisely because only God's wisdom is without limitation, and all human wisdom is finite, partial, and borrowed. Practice it faithfully. Choose it deliberately every single day. And hold it humbly, always aware of whose it ultimately is. Lesson 27. Even the wisest cannot figure out everything God is doing. Ecclesiastes 8:16-17. When I applied mine heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done upon earth, then I beheld all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, because though a man labor to seek it out, yet he shall not find it. Yea, further, though a wise man think to know it, yet shall he not be able to find it. There is a particular kind of intellectual humility that is very hard to come by. Not the cheap humility that declines to engage with difficult questions as a way of avoiding the discomfort of wrestling with them, but the genuine humility that engages fully, that pushes the inquiry as far as it can be pushed with complete integrity, and then arrives honestly at the boundary beyond which human understanding cannot go. Solomon has reached that boundary. He reports his arrival there not with bitterness or defeat, but with the quiet dignity of a man who has genuinely done the work and is honest about what the work revealed. The work of God, the full architecture of his purposes, the complete logic of his providence, the ultimate meaning that connects every individual event into the story he is telling across all of history, is not available to human inspection, no matter how gifted or diligent the inspector. This is true for the ordinary person, and it is equally true for the extraordinary one. The wise man who thinks he knows it, Solomon says explicitly, will discover that he cannot. The limitation is not a function of intelligence or effort or spiritual development. It is a function of what it means to be a creature rather than the creator. God sees the whole, we see our part, and the gap between those two vantage points is one that no quantity of human wisdom can close. The faith response to this reality is not frustration, but trust. The person who needs to understand everything before they can trust God will live in perpetual anxiety because they will never have enough understanding. But the person who can trust the character of God, even when God's ways exceed their comprehension, who can hold the mystery with open hands rather than clenched ones, discovers a peace that genuinely surpasses understanding, as Paul will later describe it. You do not need to understand everything God is doing. You need to know enough about who God is to trust Him with everything you cannot understand. That is not less than certainty. In many ways, it is more. Lesson 28. Enjoy the simple gifts of each day. They are exactly what God intends. Ecclesiastes 2:24-25. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? After all the examining and testing and questioning and honest reporting of emptiness, Ecclesiastes arrives here at something that can easily be read as too small to contain the wisdom the book has been building toward. Eat, drink, enjoy your work. This is the conclusion. After the philosophy, the suffering, the genuine intellectual wrestling with the deepest questions available to human consciousness, this is the practical recommendation. But read it again slowly and notice what Solomon is actually saying underneath the apparent simplicity. The ability to sit down to a meal with genuine pleasure, the capacity for genuine enjoyment of honest work, the simple, unhurried contentment of a person present to the ordinary goodness of an ordinary day, these are not small things. They are, in fact, difficult things. They require a quality of inner freedom that most ambitious, driven, anxious, comparison-saturated modern people do not naturally possess. They require the ability to be here rather than somewhere in the future or the past. They require the freedom from the relentless upward comparison that constantly reframes whatever you have as inadequate in light of what someone else has. They require the spiritual maturity to receive a gift without immediately calculating how it could be larger or how it might be lost. And Solomon identifies these simple capacities as gifts from God, not as default settings that every person possesses, but as graces that God gives to those who receive them. Who can enjoy life, he asks, apart from God? The person without God has the meal, but lacks the capacity for the kind of joy the meal is designed to produce. The work may be accomplished, but the soul remains restless, unable to settle into the satisfaction that the work was designed to provide, because it is always reaching for more, always measuring this achievement against the next, always arriving and immediately preparing to depart. God's gift to those who fear Him is precisely this capacity, the capacity to be fully present to the good He has placed in front of them today, without diminishing it by comparison to anything else, and to receive it with genuine, uncomplicated gratitude. That is not small. That is everything. Lesson 29. Honor the commitments you make before God. Your word is sacred. Ecclesiastes 5:4-5. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it. For He hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. The instruction here is as direct and as unambiguous as anything Ecclesiastes contains. When you make a promise to God, keep it. Do not delay. Do not make excuses. Do not treat the commitment as a provisional expression of intention that circumstances can legitimately revise later. A vow made before God is not a social contract that can be renegotiated when the terms become inconvenient. It is a sacred act that carries the weight of your relationship with the one before whom it was made. And the person who vows carelessly and fulfills carelessly is not treating God carelessly alone. They are treating their own word, their own integrity, their own character as something cheap. But the wisdom here extends beyond the specific category of formal religious vows to the broader territory of human commitment and promise-keeping in general. The person who is habitually unreliable, who makes commitments freely and fulfills them selectively, who says yes easily because saying yes feels better in the moment, regardless of whether yes is what they are actually capable of delivering, that person is building a life on a foundation of eroded trust that will eventually give way in ways they did not anticipate. Every unfulfilled commitment is a small withdrawal from a relational account that can only be built by deposits of reliability over time. Solomon's practical advice is radical in its simplicity. If you are not certain you can keep it, do not make it. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. This is not a counsel of undercommitment. It is a counsel of authentic commitment. It is the wisdom that says, mean what you say and say only what you mean, because the world you build with your words is the world you will have to live in. The person whose yes is always yes and whose no is always no, whose commitments are made carefully and kept consistently. This person builds something that is genuinely rare and genuinely valuable. Their word becomes one of the most trusted things in the lives of the people who know them. That is a legacy worth building. Lesson 30. Remember your Creator while your days are full of strength. Ecclesiastes 12:1. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. This verse is addressed primarily to the young, and it carries the particular weight of wisdom, addressed specifically to those who have the most to gain from receiving it, and the least accumulated experience to make the receiving of it feel urgent. Youth is the season of greatest energy, greatest openness, greatest neuroplasticity, the season when habits are most easily formed, when the character is most genuinely malleable, when the choice to orient your life toward God will have the longest possible runway for bearing fruit. It is also, paradoxically, the season when the urgency of that choice feels least immediately compelling, because the body is strong, and the future is long, and the distractions are vivid, and God can always be included later, when there is more time and less excitement. Solomon has lived into the later years, and he is writing this from that vantage point. He knows what the evil days look like, the days when the vigor fades, and the pleasures lose their savor, and the body begins the long process of returning to the earth. He is not describing old age as hopeless or faithless people as beyond rescue. The grace of God is not age-restricted, and Ecclesiastes is not a book that condemns those who arrive at God late rather than early. But he is honest about what is lost when the years of strength are spent building a life that has no room for God in it. The habits of soul that would have formed most easily at 20 are harder to form at 60. Not impossible, but harder, because the neural pathways of decades-long patterns have been laid down in a different direction and require more force to redirect. If you are young and encountering this verse, do not read it as a warning from a distance. Read it as an invitation from a friend who cares enough to tell you the truth before the cost of ignoring it is visible. The time you give to God now, in prayer, in scripture, in the gradual formation of a character shaped by the fear of God, is the most consequential investment you will ever make, because it compounds across every decade of your life that follows. Begin now, not tomorrow, not when things settle down. Now, while your hands are strong and your heart is open, and the days ahead are still full of the possibility of what they can become. Lesson 31. The fool's laughter is brief. Build something deeper than amusement. Ecclesiastes 7:6. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. This is one of the more understated images in Ecclesiastes, and one of the more precise in its observation. The crackling of thorns under a pot, a fire that burns quickly and brightly and hotly, and is then entirely spent, leaving nothing behind but ash. It makes a lot of noise while it is happening. It produces a vivid burst of energy and light. But it does not last. It does not produce the kind of sustained heat that genuine cooking requires, and it burns itself out with a completeness that leaves no residue of warmth. This is Solomon's image for the laughter of the fool, not laughter in general, not the deep, grateful, genuine joy that Ecclesiastes elsewhere affirms as a gift from God, but the specific quality of amusement that asks nothing of you, requires no depth, produces no growth, and burns out as quickly as it ignited. The entertainment that keeps you occupied without enlarging you. The humor that relieves the surface tension of life without addressing any of its actual weight. The social performance of having a good time that leaves you, when it is over, no different from who you were before it began. Possibly a little more tired, a little more hollow, a little more aware, if you are paying attention, that you have spent another evening on something that delivered nothing that lasts. The contrast Ecclesiastes is drawing throughout this section is between two ways of engaging with life. The way that is oriented toward depth and truth and genuine substance, even when that orientation costs something, even when it is less immediately entertaining than the alternative, and the way that consistently chooses the crackling of thorns, the bright and brief and ultimately empty experience, because it is more comfortable in the moment than the slower, quieter, more genuinely sustaining alternative. Build your life on the kind of engagement with God, with people, with work, and with the world that produces warmth that lasts through the long cold of hard seasons, not the crackling fire of constant amusement that burns bright and leaves you cold before the night is half over. Lesson 32. God's judgment covers the whole life. Live with that awareness. Ecclesiastes 12:14. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. The final chapter of Ecclesiastes builds toward this verse with the slow, sure momentum of a conclusion that has been earned by everything that preceded it. After all the honesty about vanity, after all the careful observation of injustice and impermanence, and the failure of earthly things to supply ultimate meaning, after all the qualified affirmations and the hard-won wisdom, after all of it, this is where Solomon lands. God will bring every work into judgment, every secret thing, whether good or evil. The accountability dimension of this verse is real and should be allowed to carry its full weight. We do not perform for the camera and live a different life when the camera is off without consequence. We do not cultivate a public version of character that is unreconnected to the private version without that disconnection having genuine spiritual significance. The gap between who we are in public and who we are in private is not a private matter. It is the most spiritually significant gap in any person's life, because it is the gap between the self we present to the world and the self we present to God. And God's judgment comprehends both simultaneously. Every secret thing. He sees it all, and it all matters. But the comfort this verse carries is equally real and equally important, and it should not be lost in the emphasis on accountability. Every secret thing, including the good ones, including the private acts of faithfulness that no one witnessed, including the prayer prayed alone in the dark, including the sacrifice made quietly for someone who never knew the cost you bore, including the moment when you chose right in a situation where choosing wrong would have been easy, undetected, and genuinely advantageous. God saw it. Every one of those moments is in the record He keeps, a record whose comprehensiveness puts every human record-keeping system to shame. The witness to your life is perfect, and the judge of your life is perfectly just and perfectly merciful. Live in the light of that reality, not in fear, but in the freedom of a person who has nothing to hide and everything to offer. Lesson 33. Fear God and keep His commandments. This is where all the searching ends. Ecclesiastes 12:13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Here we arrive at the end of the longest road in all of wisdom literature, and what we find waiting for us is not complicated. After 12 chapters of extraordinary intellectual and spiritual honesty, after the testing of pleasure and the exhaustion of achievement and the grief of wisdom pursued as its own end, after the observation of injustice and the acknowledgement of mystery and the recurring honest confrontation with the impermanence of everything we are most tempted to build our lives upon. After all of it, Solomon brings us to a conclusion that is as simple as it is inexhaustible. Fear God and keep his commandments. The simplicity of this conclusion is not anticlimactic. It is the only resolution proportionate to the scale of the questions that preceded it. If you have genuinely traveled through the preceding chapters and allowed them to do their work, you arrive at this final verse not as someone looking for a more sophisticated answer, but as someone who has been genuinely emptied of the illusion that a more sophisticated answer is what the soul actually needs. The soul does not need a better system or a more nuanced philosophy or a more carefully optimized approach to self-fulfillment. The soul needs God, rightly feared and rightly obeyed, present at the center of all of life's activity and all of life's rest. Fear God. The word has layers. At its most basic, it is the acknowledgement that there is one before whom all of life is lived, one whose reality exceeds your ability to fully comprehend, whose authority exceeds your ability to exceed, whose love is so vast and so unconditional that it is genuinely frightening in the best possible sense. Frightening not because it threatens, but because it overwhelms, because it is so much larger than anything you have been shaped to expect from love. Because standing in it requires a surrender of the self-sufficiency that you have spent a lifetime building as your primary protection. Fear God means know that he is God and that you are not. Let that knowledge govern everything. Keep his commandments, not because the commandments are arbitrary rules invented to test your compliance, not because God is a demanding sovereign looking for excuses to withhold. The commandments are the articulation of what it looks like to live in the reality that the fear of God reveals. They are the practical shape that reverence takes when it descends from the inner life into the actual daily concrete decisions that constitute a human life. Keep the Sabbath because the world's restlessness is not your template. Honor your parents because relationship with God is inseparable from relationship with the people God gave you. Do not steal, do not lie, do not commit adultery. These are not the grudging minimum of acceptable behavior. They are the architecture of the kind of life in which genuine human flourishing is actually possible, the structures within which the best things about human community can grow and be protected. And note what Solomon says this amounts to: the whole duty of man, not part of the picture, not the spiritual aspect of an otherwise secular life, the whole of it. Every ambition, every relationship, every act of labor and rest and pleasure and grief, every use of words and every stewardship of resources and every response to injustice and every moment of contentment in ordinary goodness, all of it. The entire span and depth of human existence is encompassed within this single, ancient, endlessly sufficient wisdom. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is where the chaos ends. This is where the clarity begins. This is the answer that Ecclesiastes has been building toward from its first word to its last. Not a system, not a philosophy, not a program for self-optimization or a strategy for secular success with a thin spiritual layer applied over the top, but a living, daily, whole-person orientation toward the God who made you for himself and will not stop calling you until you come. The world will keep generating noise. The sun will keep rising and setting with a regularity that does not pause for your convenience. Generations will come and go. Every earthly achievement will eventually pass to someone who did not build it and may not sustain it. Every pleasure will eventually exhaust itself. Every form of wisdom pursued, apart from God, will eventually reach the limits that all Hebel reaches. Through all of it, across every century and every culture and every chaotic season of human history, this word has stood without alteration and without diminishment. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of what it means to be a human being. May you carry that truth out of this video and into your Monday morning and your Friday night, and every ordinary and extraordinary moment in between. May it be the word you return to when everything else is loud and nothing else is clear. May it be the anchor that holds when every other anchor gives way. And may the God of Ecclesiastes, the God who sets eternity in human hearts, who makes all things beautiful in their time, who sees every secret thing and forgets none of it, who offers to every weary and searching soul the incomparable gift of rest in Him. May that God be with you in every season of your life, guiding every step, sustaining every breath, and carrying you with faithful love all the way home. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching this video all the way to the end. What you did here today, choosing to sit with the ancient wisdom of Ecclesiastes rather than the noise of 1,000 other things competing for your attention, is itself an act of faith. And it does not go unnoticed by the God who sees every secret thing. If this video gave you something today, a verse that landed with unexpected weight, a lesson that rearranged something inside you, a moment of clarity in the middle of whatever chaos your week has brought, please share it. Share it with a friend who is searching. Share it with a family member who is going through a hard season and needs to hear that meaning is real and God is near and clarity is possible even in the most confusing circumstances. Share it on your social media. Text it to someone. Send it to your small group. Let this ancient wisdom reach as many hearts as it can, because the world is full of people asking exactly the questions Ecclesiastes answers. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so, hit the like button and turn on your notifications, because we are just getting started. Every week on this channel, we go deep into the Word of God. We do not skim, we do not settle for the surface. We go after the real depth, the transformative truth, the kind of wisdom that changes not just what you know, but who you are. The videos ahead are going to take you through more of the most extraordinary books of Scripture, with the same care and the same heart that went into this one. Upcoming content will continue to dig into the wisdom books, the prophets, the letters of the New Testament, into every corner of God's Word that holds the kind of light you have been looking for. You should not miss a single one. Subscribe, be here, bring someone with you. Until next time, go in the wisdom of God. Go in the peace of the one who made every season beautiful, and may His blessing rest on you, on your family, on your work, and on every ordinary and extraordinary day that lies between now and the moment you see Him face to face. God bless.